I'd like to show you my method of blending and explain why it's important to learn how to soften a transition line. And one of the reasons is if you look at this piece, you'll see that there's a red that was put down here. Now, if I had left the inside transition line without blending it, it would create a hard line. So I don't always use this technique, but especially when I'm trying to make something smooth or round like this, and I keep layering darker colors or different colors on it. Do you see how this goes from a red and then it just softens in and it almost becomes an orange over the yellow? Well, the yellow was put on first, and then this was put on second. So if I just put that amount of color on there and didn't lose that transition line, it would create a hard line right along here. So this is something that you might need to know. Okay, what I'm going to do is show you how I would have put that red on and how I would have blended it. Okay, along the pear edge, I would have probably applied it like this. Nice straight edge. And then what I want to lose is anything that's inside on the pear. So I'll take my flat brush, take about half or a little more than half of the water out of it, and I'll come in here and work on that hard line like that's created. And what I do is I use my brush so that it's half on the color and half on the paper, and I pick up the paint and I walk it out and walk it back in, walk it out, and I continue to soften it until that inside line has faded and gone into a different value. And that's called removing a transition line, because the transition line, I will explain to you, is the inside hard line that I just created. It's this line right here, and that's what I want to remove, okay? Another way that you can blend is with your round brush. And sometimes when I'm putting on a background color, I might come up close to an object and apply some color that's going to go into the background like so. And then I can come in either with my flat or my round brush, carry a little more water this time, walk into it, walk the color out, and I do it a couple of times. First I do it so that there's water on the paper, and then I will do it to soften that a little bit, and then I'll come out and work on the edges. If you like to work with the round brush, you just keep playing with it like this until the outside disappears. Very often I go back in with my flat brush to at least get that so that it's totally disappeared into the paper or the color that I'm working on. When you're not trying to do this on white paper, this outside line doesn't show very much because it's just like a thin glaze over whatever your subject is. Then you want to go back in and splay out your color if it looks like it's stopped too abruptly. See how much nicer that is than that? That stopped a little abruptly. So we're going to just soften that out a little bit. And learning how long you can work on the paper is also an important thing. And that is, again, one of the things that I like about 300-pound paper, because it gives me more time to do this, because it holds the water longer than, say, 140-pound paper. Now, many people that work faster than I do prefer 140-pound paper, and that's great. But that's why I use the 300. Okay, so that's the idea of using the round brush to do most of your blending with. Then there's another very important way that I blend, and that is what's called side loading. And it takes a little bit of practice. And I'm going to show you with a very large brush so you can really understand it. And I'm going to wet the large brush and take about half of the water out of it. and then come in and pick up a little bit of color on the corner of your brush. And I think I got a little too much on there. I don't want it to go halfway across the brush when I pick up the color. So I want to put paint on about this much of my brush, okay? Got it here, there. So I just take the side of the brush, touch into it, and then when I set it down on my palette, you can see that both sides are hard edged. And what I want to do is move it to the left, move it to the right, or back and forth basically. And then it starts to fade across your brush. So then you have a stroke that is something like this when you apply it. And you see how by having the water in my brush, that has almost taken that hard inside transition line out. Now, it could have gone out even a little bit softer, and I will show you one more time. Take 50% of the water out of your brush, come into your palette, and go back and forth with the stroke. When it starts to soften on your palette, then you will see that it will also soften on your paper. And I use short, choppy, pulling, overlapping strokes. This paper is a little bit rougher than some, so what happens on the inside line sometimes creates a little more texture, and that can be fixed later. But when I use this very often, it's when I'm painting a petal or painting a flower, and say this, oh, here's a good place down here. There's a flower that has a center on it, and I have some light paint, maybe a wash of paint out here for a petal. Okay, nice pink, thin wash, not very dark. And while it's wet, I can go in and create a shaded area, or I can wait until it's dry to do this. Okay, so I'm going to try a darker value. Got too much water on that brush. And that's why you need to practice it, because it just doesn't happen real easily. Then I'm going to come in with the dark and go around that center. And see, that's almost completed the flower or petal. Now, if I wanted to do some streaks in that, again, I could do it either while it's wet or while it's dry. And I could take my brush, go in and do that, and then streak it out. Pull it this way, and then streak it out a little bit. Pull it this way, and streak it out a little bit. And you see how the edge comes out a little bit in streaks. The other way you could do it is to put your dark red on first, and that way you can really see where you're going with it. And it also will be darker if you're doing it on dry paper. Okay, then if I wanted to do the streaks, I would come in like this. But the point is that this end of the brush has only water on it, and this end has color on it. So when you walk it back and forth on your palette, like so, go to the right, go to the left, then what happens is it blends it on the brush so that it starts to travel across the water area. And if it reaches the outside edge of this brush, then you need to reload it, because you'll create another transition line at the edge of the brush. You want it to go dark, middle, light, and fade right across there, okay? Now, the other technique that I use a lot is to put some color on. Say I'm putting it on dry paper. And then pretty much what I showed you up here is the same thing, to carry a little bit of water back in here and go back and forth and soften it until the transition line is gone. Now, this is about timing too, because if you wait too long to soften this, it won't work because your paper is constantly drying up. See, now this down here, I'll just stop on it so you can see that if it dries up too much, that edge will not leave the paper. So these are little things that you can practice. And I think if you do take some time and practice them before you get into the paintings, you'll be much happier and much more successful with your paintings. Now, there's a lot of people that prefer to, say, if they wet a flower petal or a person's face or whatever they're painting. I've got a little pink in there so you can see where I've wet it. But if they wet it, then they like to take and put their color in to the wet area. Your paint will only go where it's wet unless you push it. And sometimes you can just tilt it and let it run like that, and that's kind of fun. And then they could take a darker value and come in and poke it here at the other end and just let that run backward. And let it blend itself. Now, I don't do that. It's just my choice because I like things smoother and I like them more controlled. But if you like an artist's work that is really kind of choppy and unblended look, that may be the way they're doing it. I need a little bit more pink out there. But see, it's wet, so I know I can still put color into it. When it starts to dry, then I leave it alone. When I started watercolor, I used to talk to myself a lot in my studio because I didn't really know these rules by heart because I was basically doing oil painting for a lot of years. So I would be saying, okay, go away from it, get away from it, walk away. And my husband laughed because he said, I could hear you talking up there. Who were you talking to? Okay, so I'm going to show you one more thing about this, and that is because I put it in such a wet area, it really is not much darker than what's out here. But because it's still damp and it's still got enough water in there, I can come back in and re-establish my dark area. I'm working with a new paper, and it's quite rough, and I really am not fond of it for flowers because, as you can see, I have to keep going back and cleaning up all the roughness on this edge. The other thing that I was going to tell you about was sometimes people will start out, and they'll start out with one color, like so, on kind of a dry paper. And then they'll take another value and they'll just pull them together like so. And then maybe come out to the edge and just use water to pull that together. That's a different technique. It's kind of fun. And create some value changes for you. Another thing is to wet it first. I don't use these techniques, but I'm trying to show you many things that you can experiment with other people's work and eventually find your own favorite way to do things. So that's wet, and I'm putting the dark on there. And then I'm going to put the light color into the next area. Just poke it in, let it touch. And I told you I'm not very good at this because I don't do this technique normally. And I dropped a drop of water. Whenever that happens, take your brush and dry it, and then just soak the water up before you try and blend it. One thing about my videos is you will probably get to see me make a lot of mistakes because I've been painting for many, many years, but I still make errors. And that was one of the reasons that it was so important for me to learn how to correct my errors, because I continued to make them. And that was why I designed those scrubby brushes. So that's just a couple of ideas. These are the important techniques that I would like you to learn. I would especially like you to learn the side-loading technique. That will save you so much time. This is the sample of it, this is a sample of it, and this is a sample of it. Now, if you absolutely cannot do it, the other way to do it, let's do this. Do a little flower here. The other way to do it, and I do this often, is just to wet the flower. Or the petal. Apply some color. And then apply your darker value. 2 more ways, or 1 more way after this. Apply the darker value. When you want a really dark value, make your paint drier. When you apply it, use less water in your brush to pick it up with, okay? Then take your brush, fan it out. This is a very important technique I use a lot with my flowers, with everything. Fan the brush out like that, and it looks like a flat brush, and it's got like little fingers coming out. And then just use that to kind of pull at the edge of your color, and you'll soften the colors together. When you start to pick up color in your brush, you want to just set your brush on your paper towels like that, and I don't know if you can see this, but this is kind of a ceramic painter's technique. Use your finger to press it down in the paper towel, and that keeps it splayed out a lot, and you can just splay it a little bit more. Okay, but that gives you a really nice effect. Now, when I'm painting flowers, say I have a flower where the petal is coming out like this and going this way, and then the stem of the flower is here. And you'll hear me say this over and over again. I'm going to wet this to just show you my what I'm trying to explain. When you put your color on and you have it out here, let's just end it there. And you want to bring it in. You want to bring the color in toward the stem. In other words, the brush will turn this way and come in that way. And I'm going to splay that out, pull it in again, splay that out, pull it in again. And every time you pull a color in like that on a flower petal, you're directing it toward the growth line of the flower. Okay, so here I'll come in this way and go toward that stem. And you'll hear me say that in the videos all the time, aim toward the stem, because that's where the growth lines on the flowers always seem to go. So far I haven't found one that doesn't follow that general rule. If you ever do, send me a picture, let me know. Okay, so all those lines were actually blended in this way, toward that stem, okay? If you do a little bit of practice, then I think you'll be ready to go, and I hope you enjoy the journey.